Thank you very much, William. Delighted to be here, delighted to be back in Cork again, and delighted to be engaging in literary conversation. I owe my education to what might be called Irish literary censorship. I arrived in Dublin in 1963 with the university scholarship under my arm. That was big cheese because each county only gave out about 3 of them each year. I took a look around UCD, did the maths, and realised that I could not afford to go to college, even with a prestigious university scholarship under my arm. So I took a job in the civil service and was allocated to the Department of Justice and posted to an office in Pembroke Street. The house was one of those Georgian red bricks, 4 stories over a basement. We were on the 2nd floor. On the ground floor was another office, which had its own plate fixed to the railings outside. Censorship of Publications Board. I was amused to see the members of this board arriving each month for their meeting. There was a short flight of stairs up to the boardroom, but these people had great difficulty negotiating those few steps. They were old, really old. They looked to me to be at least 150. Most of them were retired judges. When I inquired what this operation was that was taking place on the lower floors, I was amazed to hear that they were the people who read the dirty books and decided whether they should be banned. I was 19 years old, so the mention of dirty books certainly grabbed my attention. But I was also beginning to mix in literary circles and was listening to the outrage of writers who are being deprived of their livelihood, as well as their right to freedom of expression by this quango in Pembroke Street. Outraged readers were disgusted that they were being deprived of some of the greatest literature in the world. I kept my head down and didn't mention that I worked in this house in Pembroke Street. But I made notes of all the authors and books that I should be reading, but for the fact that they were banned. I did a bit of reconnaissance around the building. The censorship board had their office on the ground floor, but they also had the basement as a storeroom for their books. This basement fascinated me, and I was having fantasies about the Aladdin's cave behind the heavy oak doors. I discovered that a man called Charlie had charge of the basement and the store of books, and I learned that his passion outside the office was for League of Ireland soccer. So I did my homework on the fortunes of Shelbourne and Shamrock Rovers and became an ardent fan of Sligo Rovers myself. And in no time I had his confidence and free access to the basement. Then my education began. The catalogue of banned books itself was the most impressive tome of all. There must have been 1,000 pages with entries in tiny print. And there was a copy of each book there in this innocent-looking basement, waiting for me to read it. So while my peers swatted over in Earlsford Terrace and attended lectures in Lit Grit, I was wading through Brendan Behan's Borstal Boy, Beckett's More Pricks Than Kicks, Sean O'Phelan's great collection of stories, Midsummer Night Madness. Frank O'Connor was banned too, multiple times. One of the hilarious anomalies was that O'Connor's translation of The Midnight Court was banned, whereas the Irish original of Merriman's lusty poem was never touched. Another curiosity of our history of censorship is that James Joyce's Ulysses was never banned by the board. It was banned in America, had been burned by the customs on its arrival in the UK, but it had never been banned in Ireland because it had never been submitted to the board. No one tried to import it, or sell it, or circulate it in any way. So there was no need for an official ban. It was banned by national consensus. And today we exploit Bloomsday as if we had championed Joyce instead of treating him as a pariah. Shame on us. Numerous classics of world literature had been banned and were there available in my private library, and many of them have long since been studied in our schools. For example, John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. There were the celebrity banned books too, Edna O'Brien's early novels, including Girl with Green Eyes, Joseph Heller's Catch-22, and of course D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. One of the saddest books in the cellar was The Tailor and Anstey by Eric Ross, an affectionate account of the storyteller and his wife who lived out near Gougonbara and who had inspired many writers, including O'Connor and O'Whelan. After the banning, the tailor was visited by 3 thuggish priests who forced the tailor to burn his copy of the book in his own fireplace. The Censorship of Publications Board had been set up in the 1920s on the recommendation of a Dáil Committee on Evil Literature. I'm not joking, that's what it was called, a Committee on Evil Literature. As soon as we achieved our freedom as a state, we immediately began to deprive writers of their freedom of expression and readers of the freedom to choose what they wish to read. Some concept of freedom there. But by the 60s, the Irish draconian form of censorship was out of sync with the times. The banning of John McGahern's novel The Dark and his subsequent sacking as a teacher on the orders of the Archbishop of Dublin electrified the issue. And in 1967, the then Minister for Justice, Brian Lenihan Sr., brought in a new act which limited a banning order to 12 years. Suddenly, all the books that had been banned throughout the 30s, 40s and 50s were automatically unbanned. I and my colleague Jane from the office embarked on a crusade to ensure that all these books would be quickly on the bookshelves of the shops. Every day we spent our lunchtime going from shop to shop with a list of the books we required urgently. Of course, they were not in stock, and when the bookseller consulted his or her records, they informed us that the books were banned. But we enlightened them as to the change in legislation and the demand that there would be for these books now that they were unbanned. Jane had a particular passion for a Czech novel called The Good Soldier Schweik, which she wanted everyone to read, while I concentrated on all the books by Irish writers. I left the civil service around then, but 20 years later I had another encounter with the Censorship Board. In 1987 I had set up the Irish Writers' Union and was the chairman. A few weeks into the life of this organisation, the board slapped a ban on 3 books and baffled everyone because they had more or less gone to ground after 1967. The books were Angela Carter's The Passion of New Eve, Dr. Alex Comfort's guidebook The Joy of Sex, and a volume of erotic art. This salvo from the Censorship Board seemed to say, we haven't gone away, you know. It was a challenge to the new Irish Writers' Union that we could not ignore. The feeling among writers was that some new personnel on the board were determined to reassert some of the old values. I had always felt that the procedures of the board were extremely dubious and probably unconstitutional, since they arbitrated on a book without affording the author or the publisher the opportunity of making a case for the defence. I took it up with one of our leading barristers, Patrick McEntee, who agreed pro bono to mount a court challenge to the constitutionality of the board's procedures. However, he could do so only on behalf of the affected authors or publishers. We tried Angela Carter, but no luck. The poet Robert Greason said to me, I know Alex Comfort. He is an old friend of mine. He was a medical intern in the Rotunda in the 40s. And by the way, he's a very fine poet. Exactly what I needed, or so I thought. When I phoned Dr. Comfort, he listened to me with evident warmth and sympathy. Then he delivered his response. Jack, the English have interfered in the affairs of Ireland for far too long. And I have too much respect for the Irish to go over there now and start telling you what to do. I have total confidence in your ability to sort out this matter for yourselves. Ouch. I wasn't expecting that. But even over the phone, I felt we had established a cordial link, so I tried another ploy. Robert tells me you were part of the literary scene in Dublin when you were here in the 40s. Would you be interested in coming over to give a poetry reading? I would be delighted to give a poetry reading in Dublin, he replied without hesitation. So Alex came to Dublin for a reading in Buswell's Hotel. We circulated the media, of course, and they turned up in droves. Alex gave a stunning reading of his poetry, laced with references to his pacifism, to mathematics and quantum physics, to Sligo, where he always experienced a spiritual hotspot on the ground, but not a word about sex. The packed audience was engrossed in this virtuoso presentation of his enormous erudition. And of course, the media gave the whole event major coverage, headlining the banning of his book. Even though it was a roundabout way, we achieved our objective. The bans were revoked shortly afterwards, and the censorship board went aground again. Now, there is not a single book banned on the grounds of indecency or obscenity. My hunch that the board was open to challenge was vindicated some years later when they banned the magazine in Dublin because it carried advertisements for massage parlours that were suspected of being brothels. The High Court overturned the ban on the grounds that the board did not allow the magazine a hearing. Exactly what I had thought down through the years.